in the war waged against Ukraine by Russia, the illegal occupation of Ukraine. Because there is a high possibility that it might escalate into a wider war, especially now that Russia is being pushed to the wall. So of course, we are expecting that he might do some talaga major escalations. So, and I think naman the world leaders are also expecting that that there will be some level of escalations, especially if Finland really and Sweden will really join the NATO. Diba? So please continue please keep yourselves abreast of what's the latest development in Russia, in Ukraine and in Russia. Now we can really see the effect of the war with increasing gas prices. Plus also kung may mga environmentalists dito, talagang the world is getting hotter and hotter. Diba? Yung nag-gain natin na during the pandemic when the world stopped, na halos na wala yun lahat dahil dito sa so malaking pollutants talaga itong mga war na nangyayari. Okay, I'm sharing my screen. Would like to discuss lang yung mga basics on international law. Magdadire-diretso ako, but please feel free to interrupt me kung meron kayong gustong i-clarify. Naman nabasa nyo na to So medyo sort of review na lang, check lang natin kung talagang naiintindihan ninyo. So meron tayong grand divisions of international law. When we say grand divisions, ito yung mga major classification ng laws in the international level. Meron lang tayong tatlo: laws of peace, laws of war, and laws of neutrality. So yung law of peace, ito yung nag-govern sa normal relations ng state kapag sila lahat magkakabate. Diba? So yung laws of war, ito yung i-apply mong law kapag ang state ay nag-declare ng state of war. Diba? Mauuna muna yung declaration ng state that it is already in a state of war. And once it was declared, the laws of war na yung magpe-prevail. The laws of neutrality, it applies naman to the nations that are not part with the war, that are not part with the existing war. So sila dun, as between the two warring states, ang nag-apply sa kanila inter se or between them, pag sinabi natin inter se, between them, laws of war. But as regard the third state, supposedly Russia and Poland, nag-a-apply sa kanila is laws of neutrality for those who are not involved in the war. Laws of neutrality as between Poland and Ukraine, laws of neutrality ang mag-govern. As between Poland and Russia, laws of neutrality ang mag-govern because they are not they are not part of the war that is happening between those diba? So but between Russia and Ukraine, ang nag-apply is the laws of war. So when the war ends and the peace is restored, what is again be observed is the laws of peace. Okay. So you might be hearing meron tayong sinasabing private international law, meron tayong tinatawag na public international law. When we say public international law, ito yung international law per se. International law as we understand it, or the law that governs the relationship between the states. But when we say private international law, it usually involves private individual or private juridical person. Diba? So halimbawa, we apply private international law when it comes to the mga contracts that we entered with private corporations. Diba? Kung wala diyang sa contract, usually nakalagay dyan, the law that will be used in the interpretation of this contract is the law of the place where it is executed. Usually ganon. Pag ang contract is executed here in the Philippines, the laws in the Philippines shall apply. Minsan may makikita kayo mga provision na it was executed in the Philippines pero nakalagay dun sa contract nila that the law that shall be used here shall be, in interpreting the law that shall be used, this is the law of UK or the law of US. So for as long as the parties agree that they'll be under the law of another country, then it's okay. Meron ako mga contract na nire-review for clients na dito sa Pilipinas, ang i-apply nila is Hong Kong law. So I always ask are we going to agree with this? We don't even know what is the law in Hong Kong. Tapos yung mga penalties na i-impose is in Hong Kong dollars. Are you going to enter into this contract? Ang kikitain mo lang is let's say nasa 1 million, tapos ang penalty clauses it's in Hong Kong dollars. 30,000 Hong Kong dollars is how much? Sabi ko, you have to we have to negotiate na hindi to pwede ng ganito. Mga ganun. So okay, so when we say private international, that usually governs the relationship of private persons. Hindi ito yung international law that governs the states. Tawag natin doon public international law. Okay, or international law, simple international law. So international morality and ethics usually naman it governs naman yung relationship of states with the higher standpoint of conscience, morality, justice, and humanity. You usually apply this, yung international morality or ethics. Kasi alam naman natin that yung morality, it's very relevant, di ba? What may be moral here may not be moral with other states, di ba? Alam natin yan. Pero meron tayong, at least may understanding tayo lagi ng yung may common understanding tayo ng justice, may common tayo na alam na we agree, katulad na lang ng yung laws of nature, diba? Nag-agree naman dyan yung So usually, ito mga international morality and ethics, these are just being used kapag wala pang existing na law that governs yung particular scenario na yon. Pero ngayon kasi usually naisulat na naman lahat. Diba? Pero nung wala pang mga masyadong wala pang mga nakasulat ng mga batas, hindi pa usually they resort to this. O ano ba yung in the sense of morality or in the sense of ethics, ano ba dapat i-apply? Ganyan, diba? So, yan. International diplomacy ang natin dyan. It is the application of intelligence and tact to the conduct of official relations between the states. Okay, may tanong tayo, why do states observe or comply with their obligations in the international law? Bakit ba lagi tayong, kailangan acceptable yung behavior ko sa international law, di ba? Yung state nag-iisip na dapat at least acceptable kami sa standard sa international standard, bakit? Kasi talaga naman, meron talaga sa international community, meron tayong culture of compliance. Diba? Meron na-develop na talaga yung habit of compliance, na alam nila that the best way to move forward and the best way is that meron talagang compliance dun sa normal tsaka routine. May isiset talagang normal and routine. Yes, somebody's raising his hand. Tao, you're still raising your hand?
Sasabihin ka lang po sana ma'am na may culture, parang mas pinapractice po yung reliance po ng mga country sa compliance nga po para po magkaroon ng ng routine at saka po parang mas orderly po siya.
Yes, parang may peace, di ba? Kasi usually talaga naman ang mga state, when they deal with another state, they check din. Ano ba yung nito? Ano bang performance nitong country na to? Does it usually observe? Does it usually comply with its obligations? Di ba? Uy, mangungutang daw ang Pilipinas, let's say, sa ganito. Check niya, saan pa ba nagkakautang yung bansa na yan, di ba? O nagbabayad ba yan? Nakakapag-comply ba yan? O kaya naman magpapautang. Sa decision na magpautang, check nila. Mangungutang daw to, check natin. Paano yung level of corruption dun sa lugar na yun? How do they make use of the money that we will give them? O ito raw yung mga reason nila for ano ba experience ng ibang bansa? Kasi naman talaga, merong tinatawag tayong mga ano, 'di ba? Mga on corruption index, 'di ba? So the lenders, they usually check on these reports on the level of compliance, the level of corruption dun sa lugar na yun, yung relationship nila with other states. Baka naman, pagka pinahirahan natin itong gobyerno, gagamitin lang ng gobyerno to suppress its citizens pa, to oppress, o gagamitin lang ng gobyerno to wage war against another country. So they're checking on everything. Diba? So, you would want that as a state, you would want na yung stature mo among the international community is maganda because lalo yung mga bansa who that belongs to mga organizations like yan, yung nasa European Union. Usually, ang decision ng mga yan, pare-pareho, di ba? So, yung mga belonging doon sa mga trading blocks. So, you would want na as a state, maganda yung stature mo so that otherwise pa-isolate ka. Alam naman natin yung mga nangyayari doon sa mga bansang hindi magaganda yung kanilang stature. Yan, na-isolate. Diba? And the same thing will happen to Russia. The same thing that had happened to So kaya makikita nyo kahit yung stance ng China, medyo siya talaga, calculated talaga yung moves niya. Of course, meron silang kasunduan ng Russia na they will have each other's back. Pero hindi nag-all out on China because he knows na maaapektuhan yung tinitimbang niya. Diba? Oh, yes, Ukraine yan. Pero nakita na natin yung stand ng European Union. So if you declare na all-out support ka kay Russia, you will not just antagonize Ukraine, you will antagonize the entire European Union, plus of course the NATO, diba? So that includes the United States. So it will hurt his yon. So generally, kahit walang batas na nakasulat, kahit pa wala pang ang penalty clauses, states observe their obligations under international law for fear of being isolated. For fear na sila ng other state na hindi na sila kilalanin, di ba? Okay. Has there been judicial pronouncements of the general nature of international law? Yes. Meron sa Lotus case, this is a classic case, itong Lotus case, kung niya na to. It involves vessels ng France and France and England, with Lotus case. France and Turkey. Okay, so France and Turkey nagkaroon ng collision. Mail steamer Lotus belonging to France, nakabungguan yung Turkish collier na Bozkurt. They collided in the high sea. Alam niyo yung definition ng high sea? Yung high sea, it is already outside the jurisdiction of any state. Marami yan kasi 'di ba meron lang ilang nautical miles from the baseline doon. So may maraming portion ng kadagatan ay high sea. So lumubog yung Bozkurt, 10 Turkish nationals are rescued, 8 yung napatay. On board the Lotus, Lieutenant M. Dimons was requested by Turkish authorities to go ashore to give evidence and was placed under arrest without notice dun sa French Consul General. So, nag-propose si Dimons sa Turkey na wala siyang jurisdiction over the matter because nga, di ba, like what I mentioned, it happened on the high sea. Walang nakakasakop niyang na yan. So, ang issue nung nakarating sa Permanent Court of Justice is, has Turkey acted in conflict with international law by holding criminal proceedings against officers on board of Lotus? And should Turkey pay reparations? So, sabi, Turkey did not act contrary to international law, Article 15 of the Convention of Lausanne. The court rejected France's position stating that there was no rule to the effect in international law. Due to lack of action contrary to principles of international, there is no reason to give judgment on the matter, nor they need to pay reparations. So, this is a landmark case because dati talaga, the international court did not, hindi sila ang rule dapat, yung we follow na pag nagkaroon ng collision on the high sea, to each his own. So yung hindi pwedeng i-aresto yung nationality ng ibang nasyon, 'di ba? National ng ibang bansa. Pero dito si Turkey, hinuli niya yung officer on board the French vessel. And the court said, wala pang rule yan under international law. So wala pang na-violate na international law on the matter. Okay, so but this is before the nakikita nyo nga 1927 nakarating sa 1926 yung collation, 1927 nakarating sa International Court. This was before the enactment or the passage or the signing of the 1958 High Seas Convention. Ano ba? So, yung Lotus Principle na sinasabi, sovereign states may act in any way basta hindi nila kinokontrabine yung explicit prohibition. Kasi sabi, noong 1926, wala pang law nagko-govern dyan. Noong 1958, nagkaroon na ng High Sea Convention. Diba? At ang emphasis na doon, only the flag state or the state of which the alleged offender was a national, sila lang ang may jurisdiction over sailors regarding incidents occurring in high seas. Diba? So, nagkabungguan, may namatay. So, the Turkish should conduct its own investigation and hold people, the Turkish citizens on board there, the responsible officials, so they will have jurisdiction against their own personnel. Diba? Yun yung nakalagay dun sa Geneva 1958 Conventions on the High Sea. In case of a collision, no penal or disciplinary proceedings may be instituted against such person except before the judicial administrative authorities either of the flag state or the state which such person is a national. So kung meron kang claim ng reparations, ipa-file mo na lang yan dun sa country na yun. At yun yung country na kung saan national yung kung saan doon lang sila magkakaroon ng trial, and then kung merong pronouncement on reparation, tsaka lang ibibigay dun sa another country. Yan in disciplinary matters, the state which has master certificate or certificate of competence, competence, license shall alone be competent after due legal process. So walang jurisdiction si Turkey sa French national, walang jurisdiction si France sa Turkish national. So no arrest or detention of the ship. Pati yung ship, bawal i-detain other than those of the flag state. Okay, so what are the basis of international law? Ano yung basis of international law? Ang basis of international law are the law of nature, positive school, tsaka yung eclectic or Gaussian school. So sinabi ko kanina, nung hindi pa na isusulat lahat ng mga ang pinagbabasihan lang talaga ng tao ay yung law of nature. Kasi talaga naman there's a natural and universal principle of what is right and wrong. Diba? Alam natin merong principle of right and wrong. Diba? So, yung international law actually parang codification lang din siya ng international practice na that has been being observed. So, kapag walang positive law or walang written law na nakalagay, we follow the law of nature. Kasi yun ang mga basis ng international law. Number 1 is the law of nature. Second is positive law or positivist school or yung positive law or yung mga written laws na yan that ang purpose is to govern the relationship of any state. And third school as to the basis, yung tinatawag natin, yung Gaussian school, na insofar as it conforms to the dictates of reason, the voluntary law may be said to blend in with natural law. Diba? So, ito yung yung eclectic, combination ng natural law and positivist law. So, sabi niya, for as long as there is as long as it conforms to the dictates of the right reason, so it can be blended in. The positivist school, yung lahat ng written rules tsaka yung natural law, yung mga unwritten rules, but based on our international concept of what is right and wrong, what is moral and immoral, what is ethical and not ethical. Okay, how do you relate, ano yung relationship ng international law and national law? When we say international law, ito yung laws that govern the relationship of states, di ba? Or public international law. Yung national law, yun yung mga local laws. Like mga laws that applies only on specific jurisdiction, domestic jurisdiction. So anong relationship niyan? Meron tayong tinatawag na Moniz School of Law. So it adheres to the unitary theory of law na the Moniz asserts that international law, even in matters within domestic jurisdiction, is superior. Sabi niya, sa Monism, international law prevails over domestic laws. Kahit pa domestic law or domestic court ang nagpe-prevail. Or ang nagro-rule or ang may jurisdiction over the matter. Even on domestic issues daw, international law nag-govern. Sa dualism naman, ang sinasabi ng dualism, they are superior in their own sphere. So yung domestic law or national law is superior within the domestic level. The international law is superior within the international level. And this is the school of thought that is really being applied here in the Philippines. So sa Pilipinas, ang highest supreme law of the land is the Constitution. Tapos all the local laws should not contravene the Constitution, should be in line with the Constitution. So yun yung highest law natin dito. In the Philippines, the highest law is the Constitution. Hindi mas mataas yung mga international laws. Kasi sa Pilipinas, under Section 2, ang nakalagay lang sa Declaration natin of State Principles, Article 2 pala, the Declaration natin ng Principles, ang nakalagay lang doon, the Philippines should adhere to the international laws and make it as fundamental part of our domestic law. So, merong conversion na nangyayari. Yung international law, mga law na pinasa sa iba, we just convert it into local laws para we can make it applicable here in the Philippines. So, itong dualism ang mas nag-apply o mas nagpe-prevail dito sa Pilipinas. So, how do we distinguish international law with municipal law? So, para sa dualist, the distinctions lie in that the municipal law is issued by political superior for observance by those under its authority, while international law is not imposed but merely adopted by states as common rule of action. Di ba nakalagay? The Philippines shall adopt the international customary laws as part of the law of the land. So, ganun lang. Ina-adapt lang natin. We adapt the international law, we convert it into national laws. Tapos yun yung ina-apply natin dito. Okay, ito yung tinatawag nating Doctrine of Incorporation. We adopt the generally accepted principles of international law as part of the law of the land. Diba? Okay, so ang purpose ng incorporation law, parang dina-domesticate mo yung international laws. So, ito yung paboritong gawin ng ating mga congressmen. Pupunta sa United States, pupunta sa magre-research na mga bagong international laws. Tapos pabalik dito sa Pilipinas, gagawa ng local laws. Di ba? O kaya pupunta na ibang bansa, kokopyahin yung bansa na nasa US, i-apply dito. Kaya alam mo, ang katotohanan, yung ating civil law, yung Civil Code of the Philippines, hapsyaw ng maraming civil codes. Spanish Civil Code, French Civil Codes, American Civil Code, pinagsama-sama. Even when may mga provisions na not really applicable naman sa Pilipinas. Or not so applicable na. Siya. Okay. So, anong function ng Incorporation Clause o yung adopting ng yung our practice of adopting the generally accepted principles as part of the law of the land. So, the Incorporation Clause assumes the existence of international law which binds the Philippines as a state. So, it does become a method by which the Philippines can carry out its obligations under the international law. Because you domesticate it, you apply it at the domestic level, that is how we can comply with our international law obligation. Halimbawa, 'di ba, yung international international human rights law. Natin 'yan. Nilocalize natin yan by crafting our own different human rights laws, katulad na lang nung sa right ng women, sa right ng children, yun. So mga mga localized or mga domestic laws na based on international laws. Yung ginamit din nilang basis for expansion ng maternity leave, ginamit din nila yung commitment dun sa international law na for the protection of women and children. Isa yun sa naging basis for the enactment ng expanded maternity law, yung international human rights law. Especially the provisions on the right and on the protection on women and children, even the unborn. Okay, so dito tayo sa case ng Kuruda versus Salandoni. So Kuruda, na ito ay Japanese. So si Kuruda is a former Lieutenant General ng Japanese Imperial Army. Siya yung commanding general of the Imperial Force sa Philippines. He was charged before a military commission convened by the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces. He had unlawfully disregarded and failed to discharge his duties as commander to control the operations of members of the command. Si Kuruda was duly prosecuted for acts committed in violation of the Hague Convention. Ito ay may kinalaman doon sa Japanese invasion of the Philippines. Okay, so nagpasa ng Executive Order number 68. It provided the organization of such military commissions na mag-investigate sa mga war crimes that was committed. So, ang tanong dito is whether or not Executive number 68 is legal and constitutional. Sa case ng Kuruda versus Salandoni, it holds that EO 68 is legal and constitutional because it provided in Section 3, Article 2, that the Philippines renounces war as an instrument of national policy. Under the Doctrine of Incorporation, although the Philippines was not a signatory to the Hague and Geneva Conventions, at the time hindi pa tayo signatory noon, international jurisprudence is automatically incorporated in Philippine law, thus making war crimes punishable in the Philippines. Okay? So kahit wala pa tayong local law punishing war crimes, under our Constitution, it is yung Doctrine of Incorporation. It is automatically incorporated in the Philippine laws. So may basis yung pagpo-prosecute ng military commission created through Executive Order number 68 sa prosecute sa mga Japanese that been involved in the occupation. Okay, so when we say generally accepted principles of international law, we must keep in mind the distinction between norms of general character and particular rules. Ang incorporated lang is yung general international law, hindi yung mga particular rules. Okay? So, ang kasama dito yung mga usually covered by multilateral treaties. Diba? Yung mga pinipirmahan natin as part of mga international convention, diba? Mayroon tayo, UNCLOS, United Nations Convention of the Law of the Seas, signatory tayo dyan, multilateral treaty yan, multilateral agreements yan. So, yung mga may particular rules, hindi yan kasama doon sa automatically incorporated under our sa case ni Agustin versus Edu tsaka sa Marcos versus Banglapos, sinabi na Supreme Court na pati mga treaty norms. Yung mga treaty norms, pag sinabi natin mga treaty norms, ito yung mga ino-observe na sa pag-interpret at saka sa pag-craft ng treaty. Meron tayong separate discussion on treaties. Makikita nyo yung mga sample ng mga treaty norms. Pati treaty norms kasama sa Incorporation Clause. Okay. Meron naman tayong tinatawag na Doctrine of Transformation. Diba? Under incorporation, automatically incorporated. Kahit wala kang local laws. Pwede, automatic part na ng But it only applies to general international law o yung mga multilateral agreements or multilateral mga conventions signed by multi-states or numerous states. Meron tayong pangalawang paraan by which an international law becomes part of the law of the land. Ito yung tinatawag nating Doctrine of Transformation. Okay, sa international law, pag nandun ka sa international court, ang i-apply lang nila ron mga international law. Wala silang pakialam doon sa local laws natin. Diba? Dito naman tayo sa Pilipinas, when we implement the laws, the courts really do not concern itself with international laws. Ang gagamitin niya ay yung mga existing laws legislated in the Philippines, applicable within our jurisdiction, yung mga laws na pinasa na Congress natin, ng legislative branch. So ngayon, kung ikaw ay isang party, at yung right mo, you are basing it on an international law, can you do that? You can only use that as an additional basis, only galing sa international law yung basis. You will have to find a local law that supports that international law pronouncements. So, what the Congress should do is kung gusto niyang magamit kung gusto niya magamit yung international law na source ng right, dapat lumapit siya sa isang congressman at i-offer, can you transform this international law into a local law? Diba? So yan, gagawa sila, magpapasa ng batas na usually katulad din naman nun. Example nito is the act creating the ARMM. Did you know that act, RA yun, that creates the ARMM, that is an exact replication of a treaty, the Tripoli Agreement. Yun na rin yung nakalagay dun sa Tripoli Agreement. Yung Tripoli Agreement, because it is a treaty, it is an international law at under nung sinabi natin sa kanina sa incorporation, because it is of a particular issue, ang signatory lang dyan is the Philippines and the MNLF, tapos dapat MNLF. So, hindi siya kasakop dun sa tinatawag na automatically incorporated under because it is not a generally accepted principle. Diba? It is the treaty, yung nature ng Tripoli Agreement or nature ng Tripoli Treaty na yun is of specific nature. So para may apply mo yan dito sa Pilipinas because it's not covered by Incorporation Clause, Article 2, kailangan niya i-transform. And that is what they did. They copied it, they made it into Republic Act. na naipasa noong 1987. Yan, creating the ARMM. Yun, parehong-pareho lang itsura nun. Those are just some example of mga treaties that has been transformed into a domestic law. Okay. Okay, so, yes po.
Question lang po with regards po sa transformation. Ano pong pinakaiba po ng hard transformation sa soft transformation po?
What do you mean hard transformation?
Yung more on based lang din po sa about yung tinanong po ni Dean Raptor ito po yung hard transformation more on Congress po at tas yung soft transformation more on judicial decisions daw. Yun po.
Yung actually makikita natin dun sa Supreme Court pag mga pag nag-i-interpret siya, tinitignan niya kasi ano pa yung mga naging basis nitong mga to. So pag nakikita niya, naging basis nito for saying this is because ito yung mga international provisions on that. Ganyan. Diba? So sa ano na yon, sa judicial interpretation na yon. Pero dahil wala nga local laws, hindi pwede yung outright kailangan hindi yun outright na magagamit mo as basis. Only when the Supreme Court says, this is how you will interpret it, this is how we will domesticate these international provisions, or this is how we will apply it in the domestic level. Itong international provisions na to. Ngayon, yung jurisprudence sa Supreme Court, yun ay gagamitin mo as basis. Di ba pwede naman talagang basis ng right is laws or jurisprudence. So yung jurisprudence na yun, na nag-i-interpret ng international law, yun ay magiging basis mo. Not necessarily the international law directly. Diba? Pero yung how our Supreme Court interpreted yung principle na yun. So, yun. Pwedeng, yun, that is in a way transformation. Diba? Kasi wala pa talagang, yung sinasabing is yung transformation that we had just discussed kanina, ito yung transformation through the act of Congress. Na you will make a domestic law na galing from the international law. These are just some of the examples na kung saan sinabi ng Supreme Court yung domestic law natin is derived from generally accepted principles under the Incorporation Clause. Dalawa, di ba? Incorporation tsaka transformation. Ito, una yung sa Kuruda, sinabi na natin yun. So kahit wala tayong law punishing war crime dahil yung law against war crime, international law on war crimes ay part ng generally accepted principle of international law. Sinabi sa Kuruda na yung rules and principles of land warfare, humanitarian law is applicable in the Philippines. Another is yung concept ng pacta sunt servanda. So ibig sabihin, tong pacta sunt servanda? We comply with our obligations we comply with our obligations in good faith or pati yung...
Love na, nag-start na ako klase.
Oo. Sabihin mo nga sa nanay mo, nag-start ka na ng klase. So, yung pacta sunt servanda, this is an international law principle na we must comply with our obligations, we must honor our obligations. Ginamit yan na basis sa Lequemis Lacos case, tsaka sa Agustin versus Edo case, tsaka sa Tenyada versus kahit pa international law concept yan, yung pacta sunt servanda. So, ginamit yan. Next is yung human rights as defined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Lagi yung sinasite sa mga human rights cases natin. Kasi nga yung Universal Declaration of Human Rights, signatory dyan ng Philippines, plus it's a multilateral treaty. Next is yung principle that a foreign army allowed to march through a friendly country or to be stationed in it, pwede, by permission of its government or sovereign. So even if there is no local law allowing this, pwede nating i-cite na basis yung international law principle. Na pwede naman i-allow ng government, ng sovereign government na mag-march ang friendly country or to be stationed in it. Katulad ng ito, yung basis nila ng visiting forces agreement. Diba? Ginamit nilang basis yun yung international law principle na yun. Na pwede tayo mag-joint exercise basta payag ang Pilipinas. Diba? Kahit pa walang treaty, kahit pa walang batas, although nilocalize na yung visiting forces agreement na yan. Okay. Next is another principle is the principle that judicial acts not of political complexion of a de facto government established by military occupant in an enemy territories is valid under international law. So, nagkakaroon ng de facto government, di ba, kapag may military occupation, halimbawa katulad nung panahon ng Japanese. So may mga in-execute silang mga laws, may mga judicial acts silang pinatupad during the time of the Japanese. Ngayon nagkaroon ng change of government. That's it already automatically nullifies all the acts ng mga mga government na yun. Sinabi nila, although sabihing puppet government, pero nag-appoint ng government. May gobyerno noon na panahon nila Laurel. At itong Laurel government, may mga inisyo siya mga batas. This is automatic, yung mga batas ba na yun, automatically, invalid, vague, void. Ang sabi, no, it is valid under international law. Kasi nga meron yung, hanggat hindi na-declare o hindi natatapos yung military rule nung state na yun, yung mga acts nun considered as valid. Diba? Although, dahil nga supposedly nasa state of war no nag-a-apply na supposedly is the law of war, diba? So under the law of war, bawal pa rin yung mga war crimes, bawal yung torture, bawal yung genocide. Yun. So if you committed those acts during the state of war, pag natapos yung war, alam naman natin, pag natapos na yung war at na-restore yung peace, you can be prosecuted. Diba? Ang i-apply na ulit yung local laws, yung domestic laws na nagpe-prevail na under the new government. Diba? So, yun, they may be held, kaya nga yung mga naiwan ng mga Japanese forces dito, they were persecuted, prosecuted. Pati yung mga Filipinos who had taken part in the atrocities, they were also prosecuted. Okay, another is the principle that private property seized and used by the enemy in times of war under circumstances not constituting valid requisition does not become enemy property. And its private ownership is retained, the enemy having acquired temporary use only. So kung nakuha yung property tapos na-restore na yung order, that does not become Japanese property. Babalik yan supposedly doon sa private owners niyan prior to the occupation. So ito yung nangyari ng mga Japanese period. Yung mga na-occupy nila, mga kinuha nila, nabalik. Kaya nagkaroon ng reparations commission after nung ang purpose nun is to determine sino yung mga dapat bayaran, sino yung mga kanino dapat ibabalik, yung mga property that were illegally seized. Yun, nagkaroon ng gano'n nung after ng Japanese period, Japanese occupation. Principle that the state has the right to protect itself and its revenue, right, not limited to its own territory but extending to the high seas. So yan, meron yung principle. Kaya nga kapag in cases of piracy, di ba, na hinahabol nila yan, because the state has the right to protect its revenue. So yung mga pumapasok ng mga illegal, na hindi dumadaan sa customs, so pumapasok yung mga na hindi nagbabayad ng halimbawa nakita walang tas tumakbo yung vessel, hinahabol nila, nakarating sa high sea, pwede pa rin sundan nung yung jurisdiction niya nag-extend even on the high seas. Kapag yung acts ay committed nagsimula yung commission ng act sa within your territory, pwede mong i-prosecute. Okay, principle of restrictive sovereign immunity. So, restrictive sovereign immunity ang ang rule ng immunity ng heads of state, diba? So, nag-a-apply yan to okay. Next is a principle that the diplomatic law that the receiving state has the special duty to protect the premises of the diplomatic mission. We will have a thorough discussion on this pag nandun na tayo sa diplomatic missions. And the right of the citizen to return to his country. Yan, yung kaso ng Marcos versus Panglapos. Ang gusto nang bumalik ni Marcos. Kaya may international naman yan. Pero nung una nilang attempt, because fresh pa, nagkakagulo pa, ang ginamit doon is public safety para ma-prevent yung unang attempt ng Marcoses na makabalik. Okay, yung pangalawa, ginamit na international principle na meron talaga international ng right ng citizen to return to his country. Okay, kaya nga matatandaan ninyo nang nag-close ng borders, diba, nag-close tayo ng borders, bawal mo na magpapasok. Okay, bawal magpapasok, but that applies only to aliens. For the citizens, hindi mo sila pwedeng i-prevent na makapasok kahit pa sila infected. What you can do is to isolate them once they are here. But you cannot prevent them from coming back. Diba? So yung mga domestic helpers natin, even though they are infected, hindi mo pwede silang i-prevent from coming back just because they're infected. You just have to contain them. You just have to isolate them. So sige. What if there is a conflict between an international law and municipal law? Alam naman natin, may international law. Ang international law is dominant within the international sphere. Ang local law is dominant within the domestic sphere. Diba? So, ang ruling natin, kapag local court ang nagde-decide at yung international law ay in conflict with the Constitution, the local court should uphold the Constitution. Yun ulit-ulit natin kanina, na lahat ng law na i-apply dito sa Pilipinas, it should not be in contravention with the Constitution. If it contravenes the Constitution, kahit pa international law yan, the Constitution is upheld, or you must uphold the Constitution. Pag domestic court pa rin na nagde-decide the international law is in conflict with the statute, the Doctrine of Incorporation, in most countries, ina-apply yan na yung rules of international law are given equal standing but are not superior with the legislative enactment. So, pantay lang sila ng legislative. But this only applies dun sa mga, general principles of international law. Because nga, by Doctrine of Incorporation, they automatically become part of the international law. So, equal standing lang yan sila. So, kung merong bagong international law na in conflict na with our local law, what we can do actually is to amend our local law just so we can conform that with the international standards. Especially if we sign that international agreement. Kaya nga what the countries have been doing, halimbawa yung sa Paris Convention, pag tingin nila hindi pa sila makaka-comply dun sa international they do not sign it so that they will not be bound. Because if they sign it, then kailangan nilang gawin yung mga measures in the local level just so they can comply with their international convention. So if you know, hindi ka makaka-comply, huwag ka muna mag-sign. Otherwise, you are already violating your international commitments. Okay. Pag sa international sphere at international tribunal lang nagde-decide, katulad ng binanggit ko, wala silang pakialam sa local law, even sa constitution ng batas na yon, because international law is superior to municipal law. At yung constitution, ang ano lang yan, ang category lang yan. Sa international level, it is just a municipal law. Okay? So we will discuss this. We will start with sources of international law next week. Okay? May dumating pa ba? 3-3 lang muna 3-3. Apelido?
Ma'am Cabradilla po. Na-late po ako ng 10
Okay,
minutes.
it's okay. Next?
Celis po ma'am, proseso po.
Celis. Who else? Wala na? Okay. Sige. I'll see you guys next meeting. We will still have another meeting. Unfortunately, next month, in May, I will be attending a training. I'll be absent for 2 weeks. So after May 7, our next meeting will be May 28. Because I'll be attending a training. Okay. So, 3T, you can go out of the meeting room. Kung may nakapasok na 3-2, you can stay na lang.